Hello and welcome back to our podcast. My name's Ashleigh Dibb. I'm a paralegal in the employment team at Forbes, and I'm joined by my co-host Andrew Halpin, who is a partner in the employment team. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and how you can incorporate it into your businesses, and we're joined by a guest and expert in the area, Jonathan Mackie. Jonathan, to start us off, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Yeah, no problem at all. My name's Jonathan. I'm a partner at NRB, Chartered Accountants based over in Wigan, and I'm the digital director over there. My focus primarily in the last year or two is to look at how we can incorporate digital solutions into our clients' businesses, and obviously with the advent of AI in the last 6 months, that's obviously taken off, and that's the direction of travel that we're heading at the minute.
Mm-hmm. So just in terms of AI at the moment, do you want to just give us an overview of where we're at the moment and how far it's come along already?
Yeah, absolutely. So AI actually has been around for mostly around 2 years, but it's never made it to the mainstream press because it's not been all singing, all dancing, everyone thinks it is. So in the last 6 months with the first one that came out being ChatGPT, to give you an idea, that's at version 3.5, so there's obviously been a couple of versions before that. And we've got other rivals in the market as well of Google Bard, Microsoft Bing, and they're all what they call large language models. So what these do is take a big massive bank of literally words and data and puts context to it. You can ask questions around that data and it'll come back with a response. It uses statistical analysis to try and work out what its best answer is, which leads to what we call hallucinations. So it's just something to be mindful when we're working through. There are other versions of AI out there that can do, you can type in a prompt and it'll generate an image. It can do voiceovers. It can take Andrew's voice and turn that into whatever text that you want it in and put Andrew's voice on it. So it's quite interesting what's happening in the market.
And just as well, because I know I've only started to come into this field recently, but speaking with colleagues and friends who might not understand it as much, there's a real misconception about how it works and how it teaches itself effectively.
Yeah.
Just tell us a bit about that, because I think people are surprised when they understand that AI is only relying on the information that's put into it. There's no starting point almost.
Yeah, so I'll focus most of my talking around ChatGPT because that's the one that most people know around. Yeah. What they effectively have done is got an absolute massive database full of data. They've as an example, they scraped all the data off Reddit and put that into a database. They've gone through large amounts of textbooks and everything else like that and put it all into a database. What the large language model, which is what these are, if you ask it a question, it looks through that database based on the context that you've given in that question to try and work out what that answer should be. That answer isn't always correct, but it uses, like say, statistical analysis to work it out. So, you ask it what happened in World War II, it will query through that database and try and work out what to do. You can then have a conversation around that piece of text that it comes out with. That's the benefit of it for me.
Great. So it still requires a human interaction, human sense check?
100%, and to be fair, what you put into it as a question really is very dependent on what the answer is. If you put in a very vague question, you'll get a very vague response, and that very vague response might also come out with things that aren't quite accurately true. Yeah. Because it's using statistical analysis, like I say, to try and get an answer. Well, it's doing it on a big thing rather than a narrow thing, and that's what we call hallucinations.
Okay. And then in respect of obviously how far it's going to go, and I appreciate very crystal ball and don't know, but obviously the direction of travel or the pace of travel in the last 18 months, 2 years especially, has been rapid. Mm-hmm. There's no reason why it's not going to carry on like that with the money being thrown at it and the people behind it. And I've seen people say 4 or 5 years it'll be ready, and the finished article. What's the finished article, do you think, and what will that be?
It's a big question.
Big guess, I know.
In theory, the finished article should be almost like a personal assistant that knows everything. You will be able to ask it to do a task, and it will go and do that task no matter what obstacle it finds. It'll find an obstacle, it'll work its way around it, it'll then move on and then work its way through. That's happening now on single cases. So, I think somebody's asked it to create an account on a website, but it's got a capture security block on it. So it came up to that, couldn't get past it. So what it did, it went onto a website like Fiverr, paid somebody to be a human to sign in for it. Okay. So then it got bypassed that step to then continue to finish its task. We're seeing those on small one-off instances. Over time, those will be built into, so it can do anything over time. That, I don't think, is 5 years away. That might be a bit further down the line, but at the speed of travel, it might be 5 years ago.
So you touched on the different types of AI. AGI, is that something different? Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what we're currently seeing is that you've got your, like I say, your large language models, your image from prompts and stuff like that. AGI, in theory, is when AI as a whole is as smart as the whole human race. It's almost like what they call a singularity. It's literally where AI can do any task that you ever ask it to do. You know, design me a marketing brochure that I need to target these types of people. It will just go away and produce a full brochure and come back to you without having to go to a different one. If you wanted to ask it a different task about a legal document, it can do the whole thing, whatever task that you ask it to do is what we call the AGI and singularity.
And that's there at the minute, is it?
No, that's there broken down into different sectors, so you'll have to go to different places to do those different things. And within those, they're all niches as well. So it'll take a few years for it to effectively, all those little niches to become one big one of the large language models, of the image generation, of the voice generation. Then they'll start homogenizing into one as well. And that's when we're starting to head towards AGI. So a while off yet.
Okay. And then just one more thing, just before we go into to business and just a bit more about AI. Again, there's a bit of a misconception that it's just type the answer in, it throws something back. And I know you touched on before about voices and pictures and things like that. Again, that's a form of AI. Can you just give us again some background so we've got a full picture of what that looks like and how that's working?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, we focused on the ChatGPT for the large language side of it, but there's other ones out there. So the company behind ChatGPT, OpenAI, they have their own image generation one called DALL-E. Okay. Which I think is a play on words of Wall-E and Salvador Dali, so it's a bit between the two. And that one allows you to literally type in, I want to see Deadpool sat on top of a car, and it will generate an image of Deadpool sat on a car. Now, again, coming back to those, and we'll touch on, I'm sure, in more detail on those, the pros and cons of that. That image of Deadpool is copyrighted by Disney. Why or how should that software be allowed to generate that image? But it is doing it at the minute.
So no regulation at all?
No regulation at the minute, but I'm sure that'll catch up at some point.
Look forward to hearing all about it.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And in terms of businesses, how can they look to put AI to good use?
So the thing that I think most people hear when hear AI is that, and we've touched on the AGI, we're going to be replaced. We're going to get rid of. We don't need us anymore. And for where you said 5 years is your timescale, I think within 5 years, I don't think anyone will be replaced by AI. I think people will be replaced by people who use AI because they'll be more productive. They'll be more efficient in what they do. So if I'm sat there still writing stuff out, it's like going back to the olden days of I used an abacus to work out because I'm an accountant. Mm-hmm. Somebody came along and used a calculator. Well, of course you're going to hire them over using me because they'll do twice as much as I do. That's effectively at the minute what AI is. It's a tool to make you more productive in the role that you're doing.
Yeah.
So businesses should obviously be looking to incorporate that within them and be towards the forefront of that because they will be the leading ones in their industry. The thing to bear in mind though is you can't get rid of your experts. Yeah. All that does is raise the lowest level of intelligence within the firm. And that's not a criticism of anyone, that's just basically saying it can do this role in 10 seconds compared to somebody else that's going to have to research it for an hour. That answer that it still generates will be equal to the other person's, but it needs signing off by somebody who actually knows what they're doing to watch out for those hallucinations that we talked about.
That's a really interesting point and something, I've been thinking about my journey. 15 years ago, starting out in law, you had to do that research and it stands you in good stead. And I am lucky enough now that you can sometimes do a quick Google or a quick ChatGPT and sense check. But for people we'll talk about law, because obviously we're a law firm who are coming into the profession. How are they going to develop their knowledge and understanding so that, as you say, they're not replaced?
Yeah.
So at the moment, for example, Ashleigh will do a piece of work, like you said there, an hour. I can then quickly check it. But obviously the easy thing to be, I could throw something into AI. So how are we going to sense against that? And again, I appreciate that's $1 million question.
No, so I suppose the easy answer is that your role won't change as a partner.
Yeah.
You're still signing off the same thing to say that work's accurate. It's more that Ashleigh's role might change. So rather than her being able to do, I don't know, 1 an hour, she can now do 6 or 12 an hour. And in theory now, the capacity of the firm's just got bigger.
Yeah.
It's now in a position where you, Andrew, now have to keep up with signing off as many as you can to make sure that you're okay. But coming back to people entering the workforce at this moment in time, it is a scary place to join.
Yeah.
We have an academy at our place where we make sure that our trainees get the proper training and understanding and turn them into experts. Now, we can't shortcut that. You can't just say, you're coming in as a trainee accountant or a trainee paralegal or whatever the answer is there, and then magically I'm just going to chuck everything into ChatGPT, I'm an expert. Because we all know there's still the human interaction. We'll go out and we'll sit down with the client. They'll tell us about their life story and everything else that's going on. And it's not, they don't tell you the question.
Yeah.
You've got to be listening out for the clues of what you're looking for and then piecing it all together and then knowing the legislation in the background. Say, okay, well, they want to do this and this. Well, they need to think about that. Now, at the minute, that will always need to be happening for me for the next 5-10 years until you literally have an AI microphone that potentially does all that for you. But we're a long way away from that. It's just we need to ensure that our trainees coming through, whilst they can do the actual work quicker, that should allow them more time to do the training then and become more experts and you know, they get an answer for ChatGPT, go and research it themselves, go and understand why, go and apply it to something, ask questions of what it's chucked out and develop their understanding that way. It's just going to be a complete shift of how we've always trained.
How we work. Yeah. And how do you find that, Ashleigh, in terms of, you know, you as a relatively new to the market, it's going to start your career, something to embrace?
Definitely think it's something to embrace, but obviously it is just being mindful of knowing that the answer you get from ChatGPT isn't necessarily the best answer, and obviously, like you say, go away, research it yourself. You can then also evaluate that before passing it on to yourself to sign it off. So I think it's something to be embraced, but obviously you have to be mindful of the downfalls as well.
Yeah.
Great. And then looking at some of those downfalls and things to be wary of, Jonathan, clearly data protection is going to be a huge issue, privacy issues. What, if any, safeguards are there, or what safeguards do companies need to be mindful of?
It's a funny one. So with ChatGPT, the standard ChatGPT that you use 3.5, there is an option to turn off data taking effectively, that they're going to use your data to train the model. Whether that actually works or not, I don't know, and it would be interesting in a few years' time of whether it actually gets tested to see whether data's put in there. But anything that you put in is then owned by ChatGPT and OpenAI to develop their model and learn off. So in theory, anything that you put in goes into a bank that then can come out. So where we're definitely worried about, especially from the financial aspect from ourselves, I would absolutely love to, you know, not shortcut, but assist me in developing some key narrative that I want to chat through the client with. If I could chuck in, 3 years, 4 years worth of detailed information of a client and say, give me 10 points that I want to talk about, 3 tax planning opportunities and things like that, it could do it. But if I just chuck that in, that data is now in their model, and I've just given away my client's data without actually trying to safeguard it. Potential safeguards, you could. We're lucky, a lot of ours is in Excel. We can export a lot of it to Excel. You can do a fancy lookup. You can take out customer names and replace it with customer 1, 2, 3, 4. Supplier names, bank details, whatever you need to. You can change them and anonymise it before you do that transaction. When it comes back with an answer, then you've got to rejig that back into what you had it originally, and then it's done the work for you. So there's still a bit of human interaction to make it safeguard. Maybe a bit more difficult for you guys, but I'm assuming you can anonymise legal documents and all that type of stuff. But the key thing to think about, though, is that once it's in, it's in.
Yeah.
And if you ever look on most of the websites where they offer not just ChatGPT, but like the add-ons of we review financial information for you and all this type of stuff, go and check what actual policy they've got around data privacy. Because they use ChatGPT, there isn't one. So whilst they're saying they can do it and they've trained their model to do it, there's no safeguards for your data. So it's just being wary of that as well.
Wow. So in theory, if someone listening puts their employment contract in, it will have their name, it'll have their address, maybe the date of birth, salary, and they might just throw it in just to say, is this legal or is there anything I need to be aware of? But then their information is...
It's technically in there. Whether anyone's found a way of extracting it, I don't know. It's in there. One thing I've been worried about, if I put our company's financial results detailed in, if somebody then put a query in, very niche query, don't get me wrong, what is the financial results of NRB over the last 4 years? Would that be extracted out? Because it's a very niche question, I have a feeling it might be if I don't safeguard that information.
Fantastic.
So I'm conscious that we've just focused on the bad points and things to be mindful of with AI, but what are the positives of it?
Absolutely loads out there. Like I say, if you're not using AI in the next 5 years, you'll be replaced by somebody who is. So the productivity side of it is unbelievable. You just got to be mindful of the safeguards and issues that we've touched on. The positives that we use internally, as an example, is that we've built our own chatbot that allows us, using AI, to talk to government legislation around taxes. So, we can have a proper conversation with the legislation, put in a case, a scenario, have a chat around it, give the factors that relate to it, and it will give us an answer based on the legislation that's in there. So we've got one around tax legislation, broken down into the different sections, VAT and everything else like that. We have one around the accounting standards, audit standards, there's things like that. And the reason why we've done that and built our own server worth of data is that it stops those hallucinations that we talked about. So every industry and every business, there's no reason why you couldn't have your own version of that, that has your special niche that you want to talk about and discuss. One example that will fit perfectly into every business is you could have a chatbot that talks about your HR policies. Rather than having somebody go into the HR and say, what's my work from home policy? I don't know what I need to do. Go and speak to the chatbot talks it through. I've got this scenario, my father-in-law's just passed away, but I've got a week's holiday coming up. What do I do around that and how can I use it? And you can have a chat around it and then effectively, again, get it signed off by the expert, being the HR in that case. So there's massive benefits. And any part of your job that is repetitive, monotonous, anything else like that, ChatGPT will be, or any of the other models will be able to come in and assist with that, no problem whatsoever.
So it's a bit like an interactive Google. So whereas Google, at the minute you type something in and get something out, this is one step ahead that it'll adapt to the scenario and the specific, as you say, legislation or policy. Yeah,
exactly. And that's just because, like I say, I was playing around with it, trying to put in a few cases into ChatGPT, and it was chucking out, statutes and case law that didn't exist because it hallucinated, and it works out what year would it have been most likely have been written.
Yeah.
Doesn't actually mean that it exists, or what's the most likely title of the legislation. Doesn't exist. So it hallucinates on that and stuff. There's actually a prime example in a court case recently. In his closing remarks, he got ChatGPT to write it, and what it did, it put 2 pieces of case law in that were completely made up. So he was laughed out of the court because he's talking through as if he's confident, he knows what he's on about, and he's citing a load of rubbish.
Wow.
So, but if he'd done it the smart way and used it to write it for him and then checked it by an expert, rather than taking, I don't know how long, you'll tell me how long it takes on closing remarks and stuff like that, 4 or 5 hours? It might be done in an hour.
Yeah. But just with that human interaction. Yeah.
Correct.
Fantastic. And then, in terms of the darker side to it, and I know that when we spoke last week, it was the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, and I'd come across on social media 2 clips of apparently Keir Starmer. First one I actually believed, and the second one I thought something's fishy here. And it was a AI generated voice of him criticising Liverpool, criticising his aides, which easily believable, and can be put around the world in no time, and before the truth catches up. So there is a darker side to it. That's just one example. What kind of things are we seeing, or can we see?
Well, it goes back to, again, it's that whole AI is just a tool. And it goes back to, every tool that's ever been invented, there's always been a positive and a dark side to it.
Yeah.
We're creating nuclear fission. Brilliant. We can go and power the world. Or we can go and generate a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
There's always positives and negatives to everything that we generate as a tool. So the dark sides that are creeping into it, you're absolutely right on that. You can generate videos off people's images. You can generate images off text prompts. You can clone people's voices. And what will that allow you to do? Well, one of the main things that came out of one of the Writers' Guild strikes was that actors, as part of their contracts, were basically saying that they can use their voice and face indefinitely. So when they pass away, they can start recreating films using AI based on their voice and what they look like in the previous films. Is that bordering on malicious or not? I don't know. I think that's bordering on unethical.
Yeah.
But obviously, if you sign that up to it, then that's a different story. But it comes back to that whole process for me is what's it used for? What's the purpose? And if the purpose is for a nefarious end, like there's been a lot of scams recently. You always had them over the years. If somebody phoned up, pretending to be your bank, I need you to transfer money to this account, you've been hacked and all that type of stuff. Imagine now it's your son ringing you up, saying, Dad, I'm stuck, I'm really in trouble, I'm broken, I'm whole day, I've lost my wallet and everything else like that. Can you send me £5,000? Here are my bank details. So you panic and applying for an saves, £5,000 gone, and it was a voice clone.
Yeah.
It wasn't actually a real person on the other end of the phone. So, be mindful of everything that you see anywhere and try and apply some common sense check to it. Because there is no one AI detector. ChatGPT wrote one, and it came back with a 10% success rate.
Wow.
So they stopped developing it because they cannot determine whether something's AI generated or not, and they're the ones that made AI.
Scary. And I'll come to you first, Jonathan, and then maybe Ashleigh in terms of an employment perspective. But that example there you gave of Dad, you're going to send me £5,000. It's obviously malicious use of phoning up your boss or getting someone else it's his voice to phone up your boss and say unpleasant things. How, as a company, are you putting safeguards in place against AI? And then with you, Ashleigh, in respect of how can companies be looking at it from an employment perspective?
Yeah, so I'll talk to it more from like a business owner's perspective. My main risk of that type of stuff is phishing, people trying to get my details, trying to send them money and all that type of stuff. And that generally relies on somebody internally ringing me up to make a request a payment or something else like that. So it goes back to that age-old, if you get a phishing email, what do? You ring the person up to speak to them and say, is it me? Is it you? Is it not?
Yeah.
And you've got to be comfortable, because generally what it is it's that somebody slightly lower down the chain has got one from the boss saying, send me the money now because I need it. And in a blind panic wanting to do what the boss says, they do it. But they've got to be comfortable to be able to challenge and just have that safeguard in place of, look, I've had this email, is it you? I've had this phone call, it sounds just like you, it's off some unknown number, is it you?
Yeah.
No, it's not. And then you've got those safeguards in place. So I don't think there's a massive change on the safeguard from our perspective in terms of changing of details. It's that double check.
Yeah.
It's that age old, if the bank rings you up, put the phone down and Google what the actual number is and ring them back.
Yeah.
It's that double check, that segregation of duties almost that you just need to do. That's the one thing that I'm wary of, and it's the one thing that we've got of anybody who's got control of the bank or any of the key financial information. We have to do that double check just to make sure. But in terms of employment law, obviously you're the expert on that one, not me, I'm afraid.
I think that's an important point to think of, and obviously all companies need to be mindful that it is out there now, and they need to double check it and obviously put those policies in place and procedures in place. And obviously it is when it comes to it that you've maybe discovered that there is some malicious use there, it is, well, what action do you take against those employees that have obviously gone down that route? And obviously I know from employment law, obviously that's something we'd be looking at. Obviously you've got your disciplinaries, I'm guessing it would be gross misconduct.
Certainly, I think there's two ways, isn't there? You've got the I think you said before, Jonathan, I know we have the same. People can't really be using it until we know more about it. We know it's coming, but kept very, very, very careful what you're doing. If you misuse it, it's going into gross misconduct. That example you used. If I went to tribunal next week and did my submissions from ChatGPT and that came up, I'd expect to be given my P45 next week. So there is that element, definitely. But I think for me as well, it's part of embracing it as companies, because it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's only going to evolve. And like people could do with Google, you could mess around with it. You can do the same. It just makes it a bit easier, a bit more convincing, and it's having that element of investigations and what's your policies and what your procedures and that education of staff.
Yeah, from what I've found is people don't know where its limits are.
No.
And until you start playing around with it, don't take the answer that it produces as gospel. Double check it, get it signed off, but do use it. Do play around with it, see what it's capable of. It's almost like drawing a map. You might draw a circle to begin with when you explore, and you might try and find where the coastline is, and you'll know what it can and can't do, but you will never know that until you start using it and start playing around with it. But it'd be interesting to know sort of what your thoughts and ideas would be if somebody used it as a prank and cloned somebody else's voice and or made a video of them, fighting in the street and things like that, and shared it with a boss. What sort of the employment side on that?
Well, I personally think it's very scary, because the employment law as it stands is forming a reasonable belief, following a proper investigation, and then being within the bands of reasonable responses, and always has been. And it's never been about proof. It's never been about beyond reasonable doubt. It's not a criminal element. So if that happens, let's say Ashleigh wants to throw me under the bus and can use ChatGPT and clone my voice and phone our boss with me saying all sorts, it would then be, if I just say it wasn't me, which doesn't sound like a great defence, but it wasn't me. So they'd have to look at it. How do they form that belief? Tracking phone calls, numbers. I suppose as well you'd have it to go further now. So Andy, you say it wasn't you. Where were you? Well, I was here at 2 o'clock. The phone call was made at 2:30. Yeah. Thankfully, I was here and I've got loads of witnesses. So there is that element, but I think it's going to be a real minefield if it does keep generating the way it is, for that maliciousness of how are people going to know what is real and what's not. I've seen generated photos for a presentation you did, and you did 10, I think, is it real or is it not? And they were all AI generated, and it was impossible to determine. I could have thought that was not, it was just fake, which is scary. And I think there's a huge education piece to it, and to deal with it all.
Yeah, and that for me comes back to that whole of understanding what it's capable of. Because if you're unsure or you don't know that it's capable of generating these types of images and cloning the voices, your default is it's him.
Yeah, exactly.
And then does that open up a can of worms? From a dismissal that shouldn't have happened. I can't remember the exact term. That's the one, unfair dismissal. Tell I'm not the lawyer from here. Is it not then an unfair dismissal if he then gets sacked, turns around and goes, "Here's my proof that it wasn't me, and you didn't believe me." So minefield.
Yeah, so that ties me in nicely with two things before we finish up, Jonathan. I suppose one is I saw something. I think it was a case 10 years ago. It was used as a recruitment tool. Again, fantastic in principle, but then it turned out it was an employment case. It turned out to be discriminatory because the information input was biased. So, that's something. Just if you could just touch on again, just that part of how we're reviewing the information and what's input. And then if that could take us, I suppose, into some sort of regulation. It's clearly now legislation and regulation is going to have to catch up. Where are we at with that? So in
terms of, you're absolutely bang on, in terms of the biases and things like that, the model has been trained on historical documents. So ChatGPT 3.5, which is the free one that everyone uses, or the vast majority of people use, has a cut-off of September 21. There's no new information after that. Everything's pre that date. Brilliant, fantastic. Whether we like to admit it or not, every type of writing that we've got, everything that we've got, or the predominantly biases that are built within our human language and our writing and everything we do, is male orientated. It's generally white male orientated. And if that is the data that's being used to generate the responses, that bias is then going to be fed back into the responses. So it's, at the minute, it's in the hands of ChatGPT and things like that to hopefully try and remove those biases. You can do it with your prompts. You can, in your prompt, try and incorporate a phrase or something to remove the bias from what you're going to get as an output. But 9 times out of 10, you'll get a he rather than a she. It's all the little minor things, and that's exactly what happened in that employment case. Like you say, they had that bias in the background that translated to, well, these are the requirements that we need. And if I remember correctly, if I'm thinking about the same one, they were all about working hours, which then restricted work from home mothers and things like that made it effectively that males could apply. So we've got to be mindful of that, and what I'm hopeful of and what I'm wishing is that the companies that have this power also have this responsibility, that we're not just planning our AI and our future based on our historical biases. We've got to build a model that how we want it to be in the future. Now, who determines that? At the minute, it's for 3 companies is what will determine what that is.
Yeah, of course.
Which is a scary thought if not done properly. But hopefully that's where we can maybe come back to legislation, regulation, countries getting involved and forcing companies to do what the right thing that they should be doing. We'll see where that goes. The current situation in the UK is that they're on a pro-innovation AI model, is what they're calling it. They've released a white paper, so it's going through the Commons, they're discussing it, and all that type of stuff that's going through. Where we're currently at, though, is that it's free to use. There's not going to be a regulation on it for now. Whether that changes once the misuse starts happening and things like that, the copyright laws start kicking in and things like that. The argument the government are currently using are, we've got all the watchguards in place, we've got all the current laws in place, they should be applied to AI. Okay. So you've got your human rights law, your employment law, you've got everything else like that. If the AI generation is taken and then used by a human, that human then still falls under them same laws. So that's where their current stance is that we've currently got everything in place that will deal with it. Yeah. And they've released, within that white paper, there's a flowchart that tries to explain what each level of everything does, starting at businesses to the watchdogs to then to the central government and everything in between. And that main start of the feedback loop starts with businesses. If they want to do something and think it's risky, they are obliged to go and speak to their regulator about it to determine whether it falls under any laws or the regulator needs a new policy around it or anything else like that. That then goes up to the government then talk about it, and then that flows back down. So whilst it is pro innovation, when you get into these new areas, you're going to have to go through a few chains to get your answer. So it is going to slow it down a bit, but the whole point of the government for me at the minute is it's a case of we've got all the rules and regulations in place of how humans govern and how humans work. AI is just an extension of humans. Whether that's right or wrong, it is currently just a tool that I think will change over time, and that's when we'll need the additional stuff.
So it's not sustainable in its current format?
I don't believe so. I don't believe we've got anything to force ChatGPT to remove its biases. Yeah. We've not got anything in place to force it to, not be able to use maliciously or anything else like that. There's nothing that can do it. As one aside on this, there's one absolutely fantastic example. It did the rounds on Twitter a few weeks ago, or X it's now called. Adobe Firefly is their version of image generation off a text prompt versus Midjourney, which is another company's version of it. Adobe Firefly has only been trained on legally copyrighted images. Midjourney's been trained on anything. Okay. So if I go back to that old one that I used at the start of Deadpool sitting on a car, Adobe Fireflies knows what Deadpool should look like. He's in a red and black suit, he's got 2 swords, and he's got a mask. And he knows what a car should look like. So you put it on and you can look at it and go, it's Deadpool on a car. If you go to Midjourneys that changed up trained on anything, it is Deadpool sat on a car.
Yeah. Right.
So at some point, there's going to be copyright infringements. There's going to be everything else that comes with it. And at what point then do we have to scale back from where we are now to come back again to rebuild with copyrighted stuff? Do we need to change our legislation to pick all that up? There's a few things up in the air still, but like I say, for now, play around with it. The one thing that Microsoft and Google have now just done is said that if anybody gets sued by using their products, they'll cover you.
Wow. And are people getting sued?
I'm not seen that. I'm not up to date on all the suing that's going on, but they obviously feel that people are.
Yeah.
And they've brought out that if they use any results that they generate and they use them, they will cover you if you get sued.
Fantastic. Wow. Right. So I think key takeaways from me in terms of this, and it's been really helpful because every time I talk about it or look at it, something's changed, something's new, and it's going to be that case. But I think, takeaways for anyone who's listening to the podcast is have a play with it.
Yep.
Be mindful of its limitations. If you're going to use it for work, give that human check. Be really careful what information you're putting in. So certainly from our game, in terms of data protection, private information, anything like that. And the third is how you can use it to develop yourself and develop your business, whatever industry that might be.
Yeah, 100%. Just as a final point for me, from a completely, where I say play around with it, absolutely. Yeah. It's currently picking my fantasy Premier League team every week.
Where are you in the league?
Towards the bottom. Right. He still thinks Haaland's playing for Borussia Dortmund. But,
okay.
So but you play around with it and you find where it falls down. Yeah. And this is, in a safe environment. I don't need to worry about what I'm chucking into it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's my fancy Premier League team, and if I finish bottom, I finish bottom. I've not paid to enter this one, so it's all right. But it's that whole logic of just play around with it and see what you can do. Find something that interests you. Like I say, Premier League, it could be, I don't know, how to make this type of cake or anything else like that. Play around with it, see what it comes up with. I've only got these ingredients in my fridge. What can I do? I want to lose 10 kilograms in 6 months. How do you do that based on these equipment that I have? And what you'll learn over time is that you'll learn to tailor your questions and your prompts, and you'll make them more niche. So if you just chucked in, how do I lose 10 kilograms? Well, there's millions of answers to that. How do I lose 10 kilograms in 6 months based on these apparatus that I have at home in an hour that I've got when my kids are asleep, and it's got to be at dark, and it's got the more nuances that you add in, you'll get a better answer. So it's just playing around with it to get to know what it can and can't do.
Yeah, because I think that really is good, because that does show how advanced it is. If you say Google, you will put in how to cook it, X or Y, whereas this will say, well, I haven't got a slow cooker, I haven't got an air fryer, and then it'll come round again, which I think will really surprise people when they do start to play with it and understand the positive effect it can have. Yeah,
like I say, it's got all those formulas that nobody ever knows about. So I was talking to Ashleigh about it before. I've got it ranking my, I look after the under-7s football league, I've got it ranking my teams, and I asked it what's the best way to do it, and it came out with, win percentage, goal difference, and all this type. And it came out with something I'd never heard of, the ELO ranking system, which they use in chess.
Right.
And, I would never have thought to ever use that. Chucked it in, that actually gave the best answer, because that's based on ability levels. If you play somebody good, you get more points for beating them than you do somebody similar level.
Yeah.
I would never have thought of that, but it's got all that information built in, and the nice thing about it is it explains it as well. So it chucked out this big massive formula that this is how you calculate the ELO function. You just need to see it, but I'll do it for you. So it's really good for that type of stuff, of asking questions, of thinking of stuff that you want an answer, but you don't know how to get there.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan, and hope everyone enjoyed this edition of the podcast. See you all soon.